I think Brother Neil is missing, so his clock is also missing, giving us the timing.
True, true. It was too early for him, or he'll join soon.
It is too early because he's on the West Coast. So it's what? It's probably 5 a.m. or so.
It's about 6 should be. 6 a.m.
Good evening, David.
Good evening, Brother Rinesh. So I started recording. Now YouTube is set up for those. Okay, we already got 2 viewers there. And let's give like 3-4 more minutes, Brother Chris, for time zones. And then we start whenever you will be ready.
Okay, I'm ready. When just give me the sign, please.
Okay, just let's give 2-3 more minutes for latecomers. Okay. People are still joining. And I shared the link to YouTube Live. If anyone wants to share it anywhere, please do so.
AC.
So before we start, Brother Chris, how is the situation in Japan regarding the pandemic situation?
It's a little bit hard to say. The official figures, for example, for Tokyo today were 300 new infections and about 500 for the whole country. Since the pandemic started, we've had about 2,000 deaths. Sorry?
I see. No, that was participant had the TV on, so.
Sorry, yeah. So the Japanese are taking it very seriously, and nearly everybody put masks on everywhere outside, shops, trains, buses, but still some people get sick. The death rate is much lower here than anywhere else.
Well, 2,000 for such a big population is.
Our population is 124,000. 24 million, sorry, twice the size of the UK. But you know, the UK is getting 30,000 a day. We're getting 400, 500 a day. So one of the reasons is that it's traditional for people in Japan to wear masks when they have a cold, so they don't spread it to other people. It's a social norm here, so nobody feels that it's a, what should I say? Nobody's feeling it's impinging upon their freedom. You know, it's just natural to do that. And so I think that is a major thing for reducing the spread of the disease. Taiwan has even less, and so does Korea. They have less than we do.
We were in Tokyo with my family 2019 March, and even
Okay.
year ago before that, and definitely wearing mask is something quite normal for everyone, even without pandemic. And you get so many different variations of that selling in the drugstores. It was so it contributes definitely to the culture. Not spreading, not spreading
if
the
people have
virus.
people have a cold, they wear a mask. I mean, that's just normal.
Quite
So
normal.
for pandemic, it's no big deal for people.
And the other thing is that Japan as a society is more responsible with the rest of the people in the society. The government doesn't give orders in this case. They just give suggestions, guidelines, and the society, the population just follows.
The government asks for people cooperation. Yes, there are no laws, and the police won't stop you and say put on a mask. But people people tend to cooperate with the government. Yes.
It's about
to an extent, that's probably true of South Korea as well, isn't it?
Yes.
I saw the same thing in South Korea as in Japan.
Yes. South
Culturally,
Korea.
very similar.
Yeah. And Taiwan. China's fairly the same, but sometimes they need a little bit more coercion by the government. But basically, all these what we call Confucian countries that at one time had a government based on Confucian philosophy, they all tend to be very similar in that regard. Yes.
Of course, the issue with China is it's such a vast country. It's much too diverse to be able to make a broad generalization. It's perhaps easier to do that with Japan and Korea, which are slightly smaller in size. But
when I go to China, I'm really impressed how well the government manages the whole country. I mean, it's such a large country. And it has 54 different dialects. So not easy.
We were told that till quite recently, there were people who would not even understand the state language Mandarin. And it is last 20, 30 years that more or less this became kind of common language for everyone. Otherwise, there would be regions without even understanding what was going on TV or anywhere.
So in about, how long was it? 200 BC, the first emperor of China unified the country, and he brought in a single written language for the whole country. He didn't change the dialects. He didn't change the clothes that people in certain regions wore, but he made sure everybody wrote the same language so they could communicate. And that is one reason that China is so diversified, but at the same time, there's a homogeneous country. So if you go watch Chinese television, it nearly always has subtitles, all the programs, even though they're speaking their own language. But people in the countryside, they don't understand the words, but they understand the subtitles. It's kind of strange.
Well, anyway, I guess the language and written language especially was meant to be used by noble people and kind of some priests everywhere, not everyone. So I guess my hosts in China, they were referring to kind of massive understanding, like everyone understanding the language. So anyway, true. It's a huge country.
So since the war, the official language is taught in all the schools. So people living in the countryside, they have the regional dialect, but they all understand, and most of them can speak the official language called Putonghua.
Okay, I guess we've given quite enough time for everyone who wanted to or could join today. So let me, with your kind permission, mute now everyone. And Brother Chris, please unmute yourself once again. I will do a brief introduction, then you will have up to 1 hour. It's up to you when to what extent you will use the time. Uninterrupted lecture, and then we will have a Q&A session, and we'll go digging into the details of Chinese in Freemasonry. So, Gamar Jobat, that's hello in Georgian, that's my language. Welcome to Saperiao, the number 110. Today we'll be discussing the first out of 4 lectures delivered by Right Worshipful Brother, Dr. Christopher Earnshaw. And today we will be discussing Chinese in Freemasonry. So in continuation of the series of public lectures, we have the honor to host the Right Worshipful Brother Dr. Christopher Earnshaw, who studied calligraphy at Taito Bunka University with Naruse Izan and Aoyama Sanu. Later, he got qualified in international marketing, BA in Japanese and Chinese, London University SOAS. He decided to re-educate himself by studying for a doctorate in neuroscience with a qualification in emergency medicine at the US Naval Hospital at Yokosuka. He mastered cooking at Cordon Bleu in Tokyo, as well as master's degree in transpersonal psychology, including comparative religion. One of the challenges has been to learn to play all Bach's 6 suites for unaccompanied cello, in which he's got as far as number 4 many times. The way to be successful in life is to have a central belief that supports you in good times and bad. For him, that has been the study of the philosophy of Mencius. So it was a natural extension of his studies to join a Tao temple in 2016. Understanding the teachings of the Tao have helped better understand Mencius. Then he qualified as a biomagnet therapist, and then as a grief counselor, completing PhD in neuroscience via Tokai Medical University. Brother Chris is qualified as a professor of calligraphy. Currently, besides writing, he runs a small medical device startup and the suicide prevention MPO life management, and some weekends holds a biomagnet clinic at his office. So definitely the bio of Brother Chris is so diverse, and as he already mentioned, he has a lot of interest in life, and uh, it's an amazing how much and how diversified your interest can be, from being a chief to the neuroscience, to from calligraphy to psychology, and so on and so on. And first of all, I should thank you so much for your time. We'll be looking forward to all 4 lectures. All of them are amazing. And we hope we'll have opportunity to dig into the details. And I will remind everyone about the few rules that we try to adhere here in Sapere Aude. That is that we don't discuss religion, we don't discuss politics and interjurisdictional issues. These are public lectures. We do record and publish on YouTube these recordings, these lectures. It is open for male and female, for members and non-members. So anyone like-minded individual can join us and enjoy the lecture, ask the questions, as long as he or she can behave civilized and decent way. So in addition, I will remind that all the opinions or comments made are of individual nature. We don't represent any institution here unless such thing is emphasized. So having those very simple rules in mind, It is my pleasure and honor to give the floor to Right Worshipful Brother Chris. You just need to unmute yourself and floor is all yours.
Right. Good evening, brethren. Thank you for the very long and detailed introduction. I don't know where you found that bio. You researched it somewhere. I'm not sure, but yeah, whatever.
Was it
So
correct? Was it correct? Did I mention?
yes, no, it was correct. It's yes, it sounds, I'm not as young as I look, and so all those things I've done over like 40, 50 years, like studying at the Cordon Bleu was like 25 years ago. But yes, but it was a good experience. I studied at the Cordon Bleu because I was single and I wanted to eat good food. And I was fed up of eating egg and bacon and pre-cooked food all the time. So I decided to learn how to cook. That's, it's just a small thing. So concerning Freemasonry and my background, I was raised in a British lodge in Rising Sun Lodge in Kobe in Japan about, let's see, 84, so 36 years ago. And I think like most Masons, I went along with what I was told about Freemasonry. There was very little education in the lodge. There wasn't an open Q&A session, and a lot of people had some strange ideas about Freemasonry, and I was a little bit surprised. I thought everybody thought the same thing. Rather like I was brought up as a Christian, an Anglican, though I no longer attend church. So I believe that Anglicans all think the same thing. They have a credo, they have a set rules. And I believe that Freemasons were the same until after a few years, and I visited other lodges and I heard so many strange stories. A lot of them, as you would call them now, fake news or conspiracy theories. And I was really wondered how people study Freemasonry as Freemasons. And so I kind of left it at that. And then about exactly 4 years ago, I went to Taiwan. At London University, SOAS is we call it SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies. I studied Japanese and Chinese, and part of the Chinese course was the philosophy of the Chinese sage philosopher Mencius. Most people have heard of Confucius because there's so many jokes about Confucius said, etc. Confucius said. But in China, what is known as the second sage is Mencius. And I had a great respect for Mencius's philosophy. I found it to be quite refreshing and quite applicable to the 21st century. So when I was invited to go to Taiwan to visit a temple where they had an initiation ceremony based on Mencius's teachings, well, I just went, and that was 4 years ago. And at the ceremony, I recognized it instantly to be a first degree initiation in Freemasonry. And there were so many aspects that were the same. And so I started researching this, and I came to the conclusion, and this is, I thought I'd start with a bit of a surprising announcement, but I believe speculative Freemasonry is actually based on Chinese philosophy. And there's a lot of reasons for saying that, and that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. About Freemasonry in China, there is no Freemasonry in China, it's illegal, but several countries in the Far East do have Freemasonry. For example, Hong Kong has a district Grand Lodge for England, Scotland, and Ireland in Hong Kong. In Japan, we have 5 different constitutions, as well as a Grand Lodge of Japan. And Taiwan has, and the Grand Lodge of China is actually in Taiwan. So it's a bit of a misnomer. It isn't really the Grand Lodge of China, it's the Grand Lodge of Taiwan. But one day they hope to go to China. So they're thinking very positively. So I went to this Taoist temple in Taiwan, and there were so many things that were similar. And so I had to kind of work backwards and study how it could be that a Chinese ritual came to England. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight. And I just, in the last 10 minutes, I put together a PowerPoint, and I see if I can quickly pop this open. And so I can talk over FARA images and Royal Arch desktop, alchemy, PR, Chinese and philosophy. Okay.
You will have to
So,
choose the other window with the file.
other window, yes. You are sharing screen, and where do I pause share?
No,
You
I will stop sharing this one. And now
Okay.
when you try to share, choose the one that is open as a file, as a PowerPoint.
This is it.
No,
Can
you're
you see
not
it?
sharing. No, not shared yet.
Says share screen.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
And
that's
then I
it.
just enlarge it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you just enlarge it and that's it.
Okay. So you can see that?
Yeah, very good.
Okay. It's going the wrong way. Do it again. Start at the top. Here we go. Right. Okay. So I'm particularly interested in the early days of Freemasonry. And I wrote up a lot of questions I wanted answers to, and they're on the back of my book, so I will read it. So, in 1716, 4 operative lodges met at the Apple Tree Tavern to discuss about setting up 2 things. One, they wanted quarterly communications, and secondly, they decided to open a Grand Lodge because there was no Grand Lodge. So the question is, the first 3 Grand Masters, they were all gentry. The first, Anthony Sayer, he was understood to perhaps been a lawyer, an attorney. We're not quite sure because there's very little history about him. The second Grand Master was George Payne. George Payne was what we call gentry. He was a professional man, and he worked at the Exchequer. The Exchequer is what we call Her Majesty's Treasury. In America, it's the Department of the Treasury, but inside we have the Exchequer and we have the Royal Mint. And George Payne was the director of the Exchequer at the same time as Isaac Newton was the director of the Royal Mint. And they sat in rooms next to each other. They knew each other, obviously. And the third person was John de Sagulier. De Sagulier was a Huguenot. He was a Protestant who used to live in the north of France, and he was evicted with all the other Huguenots. And many of them came to London and set up the silk trade in London. He came with his father, and de Sagulier went to Oxford University. In those days, anybody joining Oxford or Cambridge University had to be a member of the cloth. They had to be Anglican clergy. So he took the cloth, so to speak. And then, so there was these three people: an attorney, a director of the government's Treasury Department, and John de Sagulier, who worked at the Royal Society. He was he had a secretarial position to Isaac Newton. So two of the leading people knew Isaac Newton well. So my question was, why would these three educated and busy men worry about what stonemasons and workers did, whether they had a quarterly meeting or not? Why would they care? You know, it's in England, even now, the status within the country is still quite, let's say, how should I say, guarded, I would say, perhaps. The rich and the nobility and the aristocrats separate themselves using their wealth, separate themselves from the middle and the lower classes. Well, for gentry like de Sagulier and Payne, I don't see why they would join an operative Masons lodge unless they had an objective. And I believe their objective was to incorporate a Chinese ritual that had found its way to Oxford University. And what happened was in 1687, I think it is, a Mandarin from China visited England. Now, this would normally be a kind of big deal. A Mandarin is a government official, and he's not like the emperor, but he's in very high standing in his country. He would have servants. He would wear the finest clothes. He would be very well looked after. One of the Mandarins adopted Christianity. And how it happened was that in that time, during the end of the Ming Empire, there were many Jesuits, as many as 300 Jesuits in China, both in North China, in Beijing, and in South China, in Nanjing. And they were trying to spread the word. At one time, there were more than 300, was it 300, 500, 300 or 500, I forget, churches, Anglican, no, it's not Anglican, Catholic churches throughout China. I mean, this is a phenomenal achievement. But they upset Emperor Kangxi, and he had them all thrown out, and all the churches were destroyed. That's another story. One of the Mandarins, in fact, many Mandarins, but particularly one Mandarin, came with the Jesuits back to Europe. At that time, the Pope in Italy, in Rome, said that the priesthood, not the priesthood, people who want to apply to be a priest, a Catholic priest, were too immature in the faith, I think he said. So he wouldn't allow them to become ordained as priests in China. They had to come to Rome for the ceremony. So one Mandarin came to Europe with a Jesuit, hoping to get ordained. And the boat first stopped in London, and then it went to Portugal, and then it went to Rome. When it was in London, it stayed about a year and a half. And the Chinese Mandarin taught the chief librarian at the University of Oxford so many things about China, to do with games, weights and measures, and also Taoism and the I Ching and the Tao Te Ching, two famous books. he taught them to Thomas Hyde, who was the chief librarian. Well, Thomas Hyde happened to know everybody else. He knew Newton, he knew Robert Burke, he knew the king. And Thomas Hyde also spoke some Chinese, and he was the government's official interpreter. So this Mandarin met King James II. And this is about 1687, yes, because the Glorious Revolution was 1688. So 1687. And obviously, what I found out, that there was a lot of interest about China at that time. There were very few Chinese people per se in England, and nobody of noble rank or the rank of a Mandarin had ever visited England. So I think there would have been a lot of surprise when he arrived in England to see somebody like that. And he didn't speak English, he only spoke Latin, because the Jesuit priests all spoke Latin. So this is a picture of 1740 something, 47. And one of the interesting things about this picture, if I can get my little sharer thing, where's my sharer thing? More, record, streaming. Where's my little sharer thing? I don't see it. Record, hide record, floating manual controls. Is that it? No, that's not it.
You want to move the slide to the next one?
Oh, I want a little pointer. The pointer somewhere, and I'm not seeing it today. I'm not sure why. No.
We see your pointer.
I thought it was under here. Oh, you can see this one, can you? Okay,
Yes,
good.
yes.
Yeah,
The black
okay,
one,
good.
it moves.
Yes. Okay, good. So this is South Bank, and this is, well, we call it the embankment, but North Bank. And there's only one river, only one bridge over the river. And where the pointer is, this is the seaside, the estuary, and the large ships can't get past the London Bridge. So all the ships are on this side, on the other side, there's nothing. What's interesting is this, to me, is this is about 60, 70 years after the Great Fire of England, and all these churches, there are hundreds of little churches all over the place, but the population was about 500,000 for the whole of London. And on this side, this is Southwark Cathedral on the south, but you can also see another one here and another one here. So you have 3 cathedrals on the south side. And this is St. Paul's Cathedral, and it's Anglican Cathedral, and Southwark Cathedral's a Catholic. Interesting that they're both on different sides of the river. Anyway, it gives a feel what it used to look like in those days. So when I did some research, I found that there was a lot of interest in China in those days. This is a famous book called 3 Distinct Knocks. And it's written by a German brother, and it's down here by W-O-V-N. Not sure what it is, but he's a German brother visiting England, and he joined a lodge. And the ritual is very similar to this is for the operative Masons, because at the time there still was no Grand Lodge of the Ancients. So operative Masons were using a copy of the Premier Grand Lodge's ritual. What is interesting, you can't see on this, but this is a copy by a guy called Bailey. The original was written by somebody called Sargent, and he dedicated it to what he called the Irish Brethren. Now, the Irish Brethren was, the first record is from 1730, and in their ritual, they used Chinese words. 4 Chinese words are in the ritual. And I thought that's really strange. Why would you have Chinese words in a degree called the Irish Master? Well, we find out that there were other degrees from this era also using Chinese, like the Scots Master, also using it. And in a moment, I'll show you the book. So then we look at what's happening in the city, in society. Around 1740, the pagoda was built in London on the South Bank. This is, are there any English brethren online now? Anybody? No? Hands up, hands up. All right. So you're probably aware, but even now this exists. This is the pagoda in Kew Gardens. And so, you know, people were so interested, they started building pagodas. This is a bit out of focus, but this is called Confucius's house, was built in Pagoda Gardens. It doesn't exist any longer, but it's example. In the south of England, this is called the Brighton Pavilion. It was built by the first first Royal Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of England. At the time, he was Prince Regent, later to become King George IV. And while he was Prince Regent, he spent a lot of money. This is, the textbooks tell me that this is a Gothic Indian design. And there's meant to be like a kind of influenced by the Taj Mahal. But inside, there's a lot of Chinese things, designs, windows, lamps with dragons. It's very strange, you know. But at the time, the nobility were very interested in China. And when the nobility are interested, then everybody else gets interested. You know, it's a kind of social thing. Particularly if the king's interested, then the aristocracy follows suit. And in my latest book, I list up all the houses that have Chinese rooms or Chinese designs in them. This is a cartoon about, this is the king, what does it say, Mountinos, by royal authority. So at this time, he was the Grand Master, was now King George IV. When he became king, he relinquished the Grand Master's position, and I think it's the Earl of Moira took it. So we now have a situation where we have a Grand Master and a pro-Grand Master, and it's because of this situation that it was thought that a king was too busy to be a Grand Master and be. He didn't give up on Freemasonry; he just couldn't spend time on it. There are some things we can see from here. First of all, we see the pagoda. So this must be Kew Garden, which means this here is Confucius's house. And he's so heavy, he weighed about 22 stone. I forget what 22 stone is. 300 pounds? 22 stone. I don't think I could find it fast enough. No. But he weighed so much that they built a ramp to get him on his horse. If anybody's seen a picture of Kim Jong-il, the leader of North Korea, he's the same weight as George was at the time. And he suffered from gout. You could see his feet are bandaged, and he was in a lot of pain. He ate too much, that's why. The other interesting thing is there are three Chinese, I lost my mouse, where's my mouse here? 3 Chinese servants here, pushing him onto, and there's one here as well, pushing him onto his horse. Where do they have Chinese servants in England? I think this was just to show his interest in China. I don't think he really had Chinese servants. Anyway, this is another picture. When he was king, he held court at Brighton, the building I just showed you in Brighton, the pavilion. He preferred it to being in London. And again, you can see all the Chinese influence. These people are wearing Chinese hats. He's wearing kind of the pigtail that the Chinese all had to wear. He's dressed like a Chinese with a mustache, a Chinese here. Above is a Chinese dragon holding a lantern, which is again looks like a pagoda. Really very strange, the influence of China at the time upon society in general, buildings and things. So anyway, what's happening here, he is giving a mandate to Lord Amherst, who is a diplomat and he's dressed in Chinese, to go to China to meet with the Chinese emperor as a diplomatic mission to start trade between the two countries. England was importing so many things from China, what we now call chinoiserie, which is a type of furniture. And we imported silk, we imported tea, furniture, all sorts of things. Anyway, so he wanted to open up diplomatic trade with, not a diplomatic mission to open up trade. Another interesting thing is on the left here. This is Sophia Charlotte, his mother-in-law, and it was hidden from the public because at the time in England, the slave trade was a very hot button, and you can see by her face she's quite dark. In fact, it's been said that she was a mulatto, half Moorish African. So he wasn't a black African, he was Arabic, black Arabic. And one of her descendants, who was Portuguese, married a Moor during the invasion of Spain, during the Conquista. And so King George III, his father, this man's father, married this fairly black woman, and she's quite short. But if you see the official pictures of her, the pictures were obviously paintings, she doesn't look like this at all. She's a very thin, fairly white woman and quite tall. But her personal secretary, Lord Stockmar, who's a German, we had many Germans in England at the time because the Georges were Hanoverian. They came from, the kings came from Germany. The previous era of the Stuarts, the last Stuart, Queen Anne, she didn't have any children. She had 15 children, but they all died in childbirth. And so Parliament invited a German noble to be King of England. So he's English, but of German descent. And his father, George III, married this woman. I'm not quite sure why, but anyway, but this is the real picture of what she looks like. Another interesting thing is he was married to another Queen Caroline, and this is his daughter. Where's my mouse gone? Here. This is his daughter. These three feathers on the top are signify that she's royalty. Rather like the fleur de lis in France. So she's a royal prince. This is his mistress, Maria Fitzherbert. Now, the interesting thing is, this is our first Grand Master, by the way. He married her illegally because she was Catholic, and the royalty, English royalty were not allowed to marry Catholics. Until recently, the law was changed, and that's why Harry could marry Meghan. So then he went and married a second woman, and it became a bigamous relationship, and the king and the Pope had a fight. Oh, it was whatever. Anyway, so he abandoned Maria Fitzherbert. There's so much in these cartoons to see, you know. This is just, if you read all the stories on the bottom, they've got lots of things. These cartoons of the day have got so much to teach us. Anyway, let's move on. So we had in England people building Chinese houses, Chinese pagodas, Chinese pavilions. In France, dozens of noble houses had either Chinese gardens or Chinese decorations. This picture was a Chinese village which was built outside St. Petersburg by Catherine the Great. And it's a whole village of Chinese houses, you know. It's kind of crazy now you think about it, but in Sicily, he built a Chinese palace. And in German, they had Chinese gardens. So it wasn't just an English thing. It was a nationwide, a European-wide, let's see, vogue for things Chinese, and they were wearing Chinese silk. There's a painting of Isaac Newton wearing a Chinese gown, you know. Anyway, let's move on before we get too deep. I want to go to the other side, yes. So, bing, bing. Oh, no, I shouldn't have done that. What happened? Okay. No, don't do that. How do I get back? No, how do I go back one? How did I go forward? Anyway, previously we saw King George IV giving a mandate to Lord Amherst. Well, this is a person in China painting that meeting, and this person bowing here is Lord Amherst giving his credentials to the Qinglong Emperor, and he's on a raised dais. Yes, you can see. These are mandarins, and they're wearing the queue. That was only introduced in about 1658, that they had to go queues, and they got the Chinese hat on. Yes, so this mission to China was a disaster because Lord Amherst refused to kowtow to the emperor. Now, by kowtowing, it means he should have put his head on the ground. And there's a special way you put your hands down and you put your head down. This is the correct way to bow to a Chinese emperor. So he was affronted. The whole thing was a disaster. He came back with his tail between his legs. Oh, what happened now? Oh dear. Oh dear. Sorry about this. Can I move this screen? I think the screen.
I guess there are no more slides, and that's why it just ends the slideshow.
Hold on. Yeah, that could be it. You are correct. Yes, certainly. Okay, thank you. Okay, so how do we get this one back to the big screen? Big screen. This one. Oh, yes, big screen. Big screen, big screen. It has been a while since I've done this. Where do you get the big screen? Is that it?
You want to full screen?
So I can see more of
one?
you. Okay. So you're seeing the cameras now, yes?
We see the slides so far. Now we see you only.
Okay, right. Okay. So having come back from Taiwan 4 years ago, I started studying this, and I wrote this book called Initiation by Light. And it's the same picture from I just showed you, yes? And it's actually one of four books. This is Initiation is obviously first degree. The second degree is called Spiritual Alchemy. Third degree is called A Quest for Immortality. And last week I finished the last book of the series, and it's called The Royal Arch. So it's the same. So today I would like to talk about the Initiation by Light and then the Royal Arch. So Initiation by Light gives the background to how there could be Chinese in a English ritual. Giving all this, what I just showed you about the houses, the clothes, people were drinking Chinese tea in elegant houses. They were wearing Chinese silk. Their wallpaper was Chinese. They had Chinese designs on it. Daniel Defoe, who was a writer of the period, he wrote, it's in the book, but he said that rich, wealthy ladies were buying so much china, meaning china cups, plates and things, that they had nowhere to stack it. So they had shelves made, and they were spending so much, they're spending fortunes buying beautiful Chinese cups and things we didn't have in England. This is pottery, yes? But Chinese is, Chinaware is really beautiful and light and strong. We'd never seen that before, so people started collecting it. So And then to me, the important point was in 1730, 1725, the third degree was introduced by the Premier Grand Lodge. So at the same year, in 1725, the Royal Arch was started to be performed, not by the Premier Grand Lodge, but by the operative lodges. It's quite a complicated story, but I believe that at that time, a law had been introduced that discriminated against Scots and Irish people in England. And so the Scots and Irish tended to live together in certain parts of London. And instead of joining the Premier Grand Lodge, they probably were blackballed. So they joined operative lodges. And what turned out to be that you had a lot of Irish and Scottish operative lodges. And so that's why I showed you in the, I don't have the picture here, do I? But in 3 distinct nooks, which was an expose from 1760, he talks about the Irish masters. And the Irish master degree has all these Chinese words in it. Well, it's kind of strange. It was, and there's another one, Scots masters had, the Irish had their own degree and the Scots had their own degree. Both of them had Chinese words in them. Why? You know, I mean, it's kind of really strange, you know, but I think they wanted to attract a better type of member, yes? At that time, the Premier Grand Lodge was a little bit elitist. They were attracting the aristocracy, wealthy merchants. From about 1635, they had nobility. From 1668, they had royalty as members. The operative lodges couldn't compete. And so one of the reasons the Premier Grand Lodge, it changed its name to the Grand Lodge of England in about 1740. There was no real announcement, but it's sometime around there. And why they were successful is because they had all these rich people, aristocrats in their lodges, and people could meet and talk with them as equals, as brothers, yes? And this was very, very lucrative. In those days, very few people received a wage, a salary as per se. One of the few, I mean, government officials would receive wages, and the other was, of course, the army. If you didn't pay the army, they'd just walk and go home. They would desert. There was no way to keep them there. So you had to pay the army, and because England was always at war from about 1650 to 1750, the whole time England was at war, either with Spain or with America or with France. I mean, it was just non-stop war. So the army had to be paid. Apart from that, everybody else worked on piecemeal. And so they would get a little bag of gold, you know, like you see on the television, they just give you a bag of gold. That's how people survived. So the Royal Society didn't get proper wages. De Sagulier wouldn't get proper wages, but he would design something, somebody would pay him for it. He worked on the waterworks in Edinburgh just to make money, yes? He designed a new system of sewage and water in Edinburgh. So he also worked on, what would you call it? Air conditioning, I suppose, yes, air conditioning for the House of Commons. Because the air was so bad, they didn't open the windows. Everyone's talking. So during the plague, which was in 1665, but the plague had been going on since the 1620s. Every year, thousands of people were dying. But in 1665, they had like 50 or 60,000 people dying in one summer. And everyone thought it was because the air was bad. They had this notion it was bad air. And the only way to get round it was to smoke tobacco. So everyone, even children, were smoking tobacco. But it wasn't air, it was fleas carried on rats, yes. And because the summer was warm, the rats were proliferating, and so were the fleas, and everyone's getting sick. So because of this concern about bad air, the House of Commons got de Sagoulier to design a system to keep circulating the air so there was no accumulation of bad air so they wouldn't get sick. So these people were taking piecemeal jobs. That's how they lived. Yes, so they didn't have salaries. And so that's a long way to give in the background, but that's why I think the early lodges were so popular, is because merchants could meet aristocracy. Aristocracy had the money. They owned land. They were growing things. They were growing barley and wheat. They had cows. The land was making them money. They were very wealthy. So you could go and ask, a viscount or a duke for sponsorship, and he'd just give you a load of money. Or, when it's finished, I'll pay you, all this sort of things. But that's how many people survived. So that's what I believe is why the Grand Lodge, the Premier Grand Lodge, was so successful. But on the other side, you had the operative lodges, and from 1751, you then had the Grand Lodge of the Ancients, who tried to bring all these together. And but by then it already split into Irish and Scottish lodges. But McDermott was an Irishman, so he tried to pull everything together. So basically, that's the background. You have these two competing systems of Grand Lodges. They joined in 1813 at the Union, but for 100 years they were competing. And the English Grand Lodge only had the 3-degree system. The Irish had a 4-degree system, but they brought in the Royal Arch. You can't see that, yeah, the Royal Arch. And that made them very popular because the 3rd degree doesn't finish. When the end of the degree, the King Solomon's Temple hasn't been built, the Grand Mass is dead, and we haven't found the lost word. Nothing's completed. It's kind of led, what next? So the Irish brought this degree in from Ireland, and I think they probably added to it and rewrote it a bit because it actually completes the 3rd degree. Anybody who is in York Rite will know the story, but this completes the story of the 3rd degree. However, in England, they refused to accept this. They said, well, it's interesting, but it's got nothing to do with us. And I think it was de Sagoulier, no, it was Payne. George Payne was the last person to die. So he knew about the Grand Lodge of the Ancients, and he also knew about the Royal Arch. But that didn't encourage the English to make a 4th degree in competition with the operatives. They just stuck to the 3rd degree, the 3-degree system. And this is what I cover actually in this book. So most of this book isn't about the Royal Arch. Only 1/3 is about the Royal Arch, but 2/3 is about the 3rd degree. And that's where I'm sort of leading to kind of now. If you can get some initiation by light. I should have put this into a PowerPoint so you could see it, but this is a picture of the Chinese Mandarin. It's a little bit dark. It's painted in St. James's Palace, where King James II was living. And there's lots of interesting things about this, but he was a Jesuit priest at that time because he's wearing Chinese robes, but his belt is a Jesuit belt. The interesting thing about this picture is the king hung the pictures. You hanged people and hung a picture. Yes, he hung. Sorry, the English gets me sometimes, because to hang a person, to hang a picture, the verbs are different. Yeah. So he hung this picture in his bedroom. Well, that's really interesting because in those days, people would only put their family closest to them in the pictures, or their mistresses perhaps, but not a Chinese diplomat. Why would you put his picture in your bedroom? Yes. And I think the reason is because this is a time of Parliament becoming very strong in England, and King James II kept saying, and so did Charles I, Charles II, they kept on saying, I rule by divine right. I have divine right from God to be king. Well, and that was being challenged in Parliament. And then about 6 months later, he had to escape to France, and the whole divine rights was finished. But the Chinese emperor also claimed the same thing. And I think that this Mandarin, Shen Fuzong, he told King James that his king also ruled by divine right. And I think that kind of must have reverberated with King James, you know, that he felt that it kind of gave him some emotional support. That's why he hung the picture in his bedroom. I don't know if I'm making sense, because there's a lot of information I'm just dumping on you here. But to summarize, there are many, for example, this is the initiation. So this is what I found in Taiwan, and I can give you a quick summary because in the book. So I summarize, can't see it. I summarize in a page and a half the things that correspond between the Tao initiation and Freemason's initiation, and also in the back of further down, this is also to do how the lodge is actually based on the Chinese principles. So just to do it very quickly without going to too much temple, but when we open a lodge, we have to light the 3 lights, otherwise no work can be done in a lodge. You have to light the 3 lights. In the Chinese Tao temple, it's the same. If they have to light the 3 candles, otherwise no spiritual work can take place. There are 3 officers in the Chinese Tao, and the senior officer is called the light transmitting officer, and he transmits the light to the initiate. In a Tao ceremony, the altar has 3 lights around a symbol for their sacred text. We have signs, tokens, and words. They have what is called the 3 treasures, which include a mantra, a way to hold their hands. It's like a sign. Yes. Let's see. The Freemasonry has 3 tenets. Taoism has 3 Confucian tenets. We have 4 cardinal truths. Taoism has 4 truths based on Mencius. Our 3 officers represent King Solomon, King Hiram, and Hiram Abiff. The 3 officers in a Tao temple represent Lao Tzu, Confucius, and Mencius. Freemasonry has members of all faiths, so does Taoism. Freemasonry is not a religion, Taoism isn't a religion. All these things were so similar, you know, and also the way the lodge is set out, those are all Chinese symbols. And, you know, it's just, so this is my contribution to Freemasonry. So because of the interest in China among the nobility, people copying them, even ritual with Chinese words written in it, it is not a stretch of imagination to believe that the Premier Grand Lodge also used Chinese to build its 3 degrees. The end.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Chris. Okay, let's open the Q&A session. And okay, let's start with Brother Shri.
Thank you, Brother David. Thank you, Brother Chris, for that. Really interesting. I'd never heard of this connection before, so it was, at least for me,
Nobody has.
very edifying and entertaining.
Nobody
So,
has. Yeah.
fair enough. I suppose the short answer to my question is going to be go by the book. But
Yes.
if you could actually talk a little bit more, because when you talked of the similarities, I think essentially you talked of, the three offices, the light, the four principles.
Right.
Those are fairly generic. I'm sure there's much more in your book that you cover, which is more similar. You were talking about the symbols used in the lodge and the layout of the lodge.
Okay.
Could you give us some examples of one
About the layout?
of layout and symbols,
Okay,
and
sure.
the other
So,
of words which you said were there in the earlier Irish and Scottish rituals? Those would be very interesting. Some examples of those, please.
okay, so yes. So firstly, to talk about the hard, what I call the hard function. I call the ritual a soft function, and the lodge is the hard function. So in Freemasonry, we learned that a lodge should face east. But actually, if you go to a lot of lodges, and my lodge here in Tokyo doesn't face east, it's it's just the build, and it was purposely built. The whole building was built in 1985 to be the Grand Lodge of Japan, and we have York Rite, Scottish Rite, Eastern Star, and other organizations that use the building. But the lodge, we have two lodges, they don't face east. So I think most lodges in England are not purpose built. I think most of them have either bought some small house or rent a house, so they can't face east. They face whichever way the house was built. Well, in Taoism, they don't really worry about the direction, because in Taoism there is no direction. North, south, east, west. It's human ideas, and they are the universe is bigger than north, west, south, east. And so Tao temples do not have a direction set for them. In the east, we have the letter G, which is both geometry and God, depending on who you talk to. In the east of the Tao temple, they have a sign in Chinese which says "Enlightened God." Let's see, furniture. In Taoism, there is also a square and compasses. It's used as a moral lesson based on an ancient Chinese story of a person called Da Yu. I don't know if I got the pronunciation. Da is big. I'm not sure what Yu is, but anyway, he is. There was a great flood in the south of China along the Yangtze, and he was ordered to drain the land so it could grow rice again. And he drained the land using square and compasses and a knotted rope. So they use that in Confucian terms, and it's actually in both Mencius and in Confucius Analects, the square and compasses are mentioned. So let's see. The ashlars are very interesting. So we have a rough ashlar and a perfect ashlar. The rough ashlar represents our imperfect state, and the perfect ashlar is a state of perfection Masons wish to attain. Well, in Chinese terms, the rough ashlar represents the Tao, and the perfect ashlar represents Confucius. Confucius said that men have to perfect themselves by studying, reading books, studying philosophy. So they should shape themselves, make the sides square. It's like, he said, it's like carving a piece of jade. You've got to make a piece of raw jade is not as valuable as one that has been carved into a beautiful design. And interestingly, there's an enormous piece of jade bigger than this open book. I mean, it's one end is dark green, one end is white. It's in the National Museum in Taipei, in Taiwan. And the person, it's really, just really funny, but he carved it into the shape of a cabbage, because they have long cabbages in China. When one end's dark and one end's white. It's cabbage is, it's $1, $2 a piece, but when you carve it into out of jade, it becomes so valuable and so wonderful carving. It just, everybody smiles when they look at it. We get a piece of jade worth tens of thousands of dollars. Wasn't there something else you could carve it, like a horse or a dragon? No, he made it into a cabbage. Anyway, whatever. So humans were a piece of jade, and they perfected themselves by cutting, squaring themselves off. But Taoism was on the other side, on the other way. They said perfection is the way nature made it. So the rough ashlar is perfect because it's how nature made it. So in the lodge, we have these two competing Chinese ideas: of perfection of nature, the perfection of how you can become. And that's nearly very similar to our explanation of the perfect ashlar. Yes, the situation of the lodge, there is, it's explained that there's darkness in the north because King Solomon's temple was situated north of the ecliptic. The sun and moon, therefore, darting their rays from the south, no light was to be expected from the north. In actual fact, when you think about it, this doesn't really make sense. The sun, that there was a part of the world that doesn't get sunshine, it just doesn't really make sense. But in Chinese terms, it's to do with what they call spiritual illumination. So Taoism originated in the Kunlun Mountains in Western China. These are very sacred mountains. And Confucianism started in the east of China, near Beijing. And Buddhism came from the south, from India. But in the north, there was no spiritual illumination, because that's where the Manchus live. And the Manchus were seen as being rebels. They were always fighting the Chinese, called the Han Chinese. And that's why the Great Wall of China was built, to keep the Manchus out. That's the whole idea of the wall. Yes? It goes across the top of China, keep the Manchus out. So, the north was a place of spiritual darkness, is how they put it. There's Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism. In the north, there was nothing to teach the Chinese. And the last thing is to do with the dedication. The lodge is dedicated to the two holy saints, John. But a Taoist temple is dedicated to two Chinese saints, one called Guang Yu and the other one, Lu Dongbing. These are interesting, again, because they show a balance. Guang Yu was a general, and he's shown, do I have a picture of him? Yeah, I have a picture of him here, I think. Yes, here we are. So this is Guang Yu, and he's got a big sword here. This is Lu Dongbing, and he's holding a whisk. He's a poet and an alchemist. So you have on one side the whisk, which is the soft approach. He's a poet. The other one's a general. So you have these two contrasting saints who are the patron saints of Taoist temples. So again, it's another, just another pair.
What about the words that you said are Chinese?
Yes, right. So I left the text downstairs, but one of them is qi, and the first one is kaki, and the second, so kaki is, in those days, they thought it meant to kneel, but it actually means to prostrate yourself in front of the emperor, kaki, or to genuflect. So it's a little bit different. He is actually Chinese word is qi, which means to stand up. So during the ritual, they said kneel and stand up using the Chinese words. There are a couple of others as well, but basically that's it.
So in the first degree in Scotland or in Ireland, they use these two words to kneel and stand up.
No, not exactly. This is in London, and it's among operative masons. So it isn't Blue Lodge speculative masons. This is the competition. These are the workers' lodges, and they introduced their own rituals. One was for the Irish and one was for the Scottish, and they introduced, I think because it's in London is where all the activity was, the whole of England. London was the center point, and they saw Chinese things being sold in shops, Chinese silk, Chinese, they even sold ginseng, which is a herbal root, which is a kind of therapy. So they got Chinese medicine, they got Chinese tea, Chinese cups, all sorts of Chinese things, even Chinese books. The first book of Confucius was translated in 1680 or something. Yes, 1685, I think.
So if I get it right, they incorporated the Chinese words into operative or work in
London.
lodges, let's say, not the craft, not the blue one, because it was trendy, because many things were around Chinese and from China, and to, I don't know, look fancy or look trendy, they just use these two words. This is the explanation of it.
That's my
from
feeling.
your point.
Yeah, my feeling is that they wanted to attract a better quality of member. Yes, so and they must have found out. You know, I read a lot about history of Freemasonry. Nobody's ever talked about the possibility of there being Chinese inside the ritual. This is my ritual here. It's a little bit beaten up, but my ritual for the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, there's no indication of Chinese in the ritual. Unless you're looking for it, then you see it. For example, the star in the middle of the lodge, this is a reference to a Confucian saying. Let's see, I think I can find that quite quickly. Let's see, Confucianism, no, perhaps not. The star. So now we look at the star and we, star. Freemason star, Grand Masters, Freemasonry General, star, Taoism. No, I'm not actually seeing it. But there's a Confucian saying that the emperor represents China, and everyone should look towards the emperor as their source of stability and income and keeping the country together. You know, unlike is what's happening in America. The problem the Americans have is that people don't respect their president. Well, in China, they all respected their emperor. And so that is what he said, the emperor represents the North Star. All the other stars revolve around it, yes? So that is exactly the same in Freemasonry. The stars in the center, the lodge sits around in a circle, you know, around the center. So I believe that is another, whoops, what happened there?
No, we are fine. We see you.
I don't see you. I think I touched something. Okay, I see it. So again, that's another Chinese reference directly. But if you're looking for it, you find these things. Yeah.
Brother Sri, you want to follow it up? Any other question?
No, thanks. I think that was answered. Thank you.
Okay,
Could I
then
just give a
could I just give a shout out? I'm actually in
Yep.
the States and it's very early in the morning, so I can't be on too long. But I just want to say that I heard of Christopher Earnshaw from our lodge education officer, and I think they've kind of developed a good rapport. I am from Caliburn Lodge, and I think you know a good friend of mine, Rich Grader.
Oh, yes, yes. I do know him, and I sent him a copy of my book this morning.
The fourth one,
My
yeah,
new book.
yeah.
Yes.
I just want to
Oh,
say
yeah.
hello, but yeah, he's talked, I think, for the past 4 meetings about your book, so it's been quite,
Thank you. Okay,
quite
thank you very much.
enjoyable.
Please give him my fraternal greetings.
Will do.
Yeah.
Just wanted to say
Thank you.
hello. It's quite early here, but just
Yeah,
wanted to say
cool.
hello.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay, Nathan. Brother Richard, and then we have a few more questions from YouTube and from the chat as well.
Brother Christopher, thank you so much for a lovely lecture.
Oh,
It's
hi,
been an
Richard.
absolute
I recognize you.
pleasure. Absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. I was waiting with bated breath for this lecture also, because I haven't had a chance to read your book on this new book. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think of the secret societies in China currently back, like the Yakuza, or you have the Black Dragon, the Order of the Black Dragon? Do they have any affiliation in your retrospect towards this sort of build-up towards Freemasonry, or is it a completely separate breakup?
Right. That's a good question, because that's where I started. And in the first book, Initiation by Light, I talk about these Chinese secret societies. They're called Tian Di Hui, which means heaven and earth societies. I imagine some of the members online now is some of you are in Scottish Rite, I believe. One of the signs used in Scottish Rite is when you recognize a brother, you put your thumb up and the other person puts his finger down. Yes, are you people familiar with that? No, it's a sign of recognition in Scottish Rite. This is from the Chinese triads. This is heaven, this is earth. If you show these two signs, it shows you're a member of the heaven and earth Chinese societies. So these Chinese societies started about 1620, 30 to during the end of the Ming era, because the Manchus had invaded China and they had overthrown the Ming emperor. But they didn't do it suddenly. It took 40 years to conquer the whole of China. It's a really big place, so it took them 40 years. And in that 40 years, all these triads, we don't call them triads at the time, but they were these Chinese secret societies, and they were very, very similar. The oaths they have, their oath is in my book. It's very similar to what we currently use. So they were banned by the new Manchu government, of course, and they were very strict, but it continued for hundreds of years. And even now, the Chinese triads claim to be related to the original triads. The triads at that time tended to be in the south of China, along Fujian province, which is on the sea coast so they were between Taiwan and mainland China. There were a lot of pirates along that area, and a lot of these pirates joined the triads trying to overthrow the new Qing Empire. And so they had an organization with 3 brothers. They had lots of secret signs. Some of them even had aprons, and they used to wear them all the time and put them inside their trousers to hide them. If anyone asked to show their recognition, they take out the apron to show somebody else, and they had all these secret signs. It's very interesting, that's right. But the problem was, I thought, how did that information get to England? You know, it's the timing was a bit wrong. Freemasonry had already started. Where's my triads here? Here we are, Heaven and Earth Societies, Tian De Hui.
But there was
Okay,
also
so
a connectivity through the samurais as well, correct? I mean, the old traditional samurai had a
yeah, but
connective structure through this.
Samurais is Japanese, so they
I believe
were
there's a very
organized
strong
different.
connection between China and Japan as well. There's a very strong connection between China and Japan.
Of course,
in this
there
regard.
was, but the difference is the samurai are a higher class than these triads. The samurais are like hired bodyguards for the rich lords, we call them daimyo, and they were very well respected because they had very high skills in swordsmanship and other things, you know. So they were the kind of the elite, what we call now the Marines in the U.S. Marines. In China, it was different. These were all peasants, all banding together to protect themselves, and they were protecting their lands. They were protecting their livelihoods. Because this new government came in and just took their land, and it was pretty brutal. They only had they didn't have guns in those days. Very difficult to get guns. They had swords and bows and arrows and sharp sticks. If I can read you one or two of the conditions when to become a member of the Tian De Hui in Chinese. Let's see. It is not permitted to speak carelessly about the affairs of the brotherhood or divulge the principal matters. He who acts disorderly, let him die by a random arrow. After entering, you swear you will not oppress the weak by employing the strong, nor the poor by means of the rich, nor the few by the many. If you do, may you die by a myriad of knives. You will not implicate a brother nor extort his money. If you do, may you vomit blood and die. You know, these sort of very similar to Masonic oaths.
Okay.
Correct. There could also be a sort of cabal, and so my also pointing towards this. How does the Kabbalah and the Chinese ideology, going back to its maybe Ming or before those actual dynasties, where are these connections connecting over here? Because there's a lot of Kabbalic connection, as you have pointed out in so many of your videos and your deep knowledge on that. So where does this connection lead to, or where is the root of this connection?
So this is the second, actually I wrote it first, but this is about the second degree called Spiritual Alchemy. And this talks about the alchemy in the ritual, and also about the Kabbalah, which is in the third degree. So I believe that the rituals were crafted so well that many people didn't recognize, you know, what they were intending to teach us. They're teaching us about immortality. That's the whole thing. That's what all the degrees about, a quest for immortality. And the alchemy in the second degree was to show the brethren that the ritual is to do with alchemy, and not just any alchemy, but actually Chinese alchemy. And that's what the new book is, the last book is about. It says Royal Arch, only 1/3 is about Royal Arch, 2/3 is about Chinese alchemy and how it is an exact match to the ritual of the third degree. So I think the Kabbalah was just, at the time there was another trend, particularly in the Royal Society, but many people were trying to find a relationship between Christianity and Judaism. They wanted to see if there was some matching story that they could use. So when St. Paul's Cathedral was built, it took about 20 years, from about 1680 to 1714, I think, 30 years. It's built on a copy of the Tree of Life from the Kabbalah. If you look at it sideways, you have to know what you're looking for, but once you've seen it, then you know. Then people put in designs for London. London was burnt to the ground, literally, in 1666. the whole of London City, because London is actually two cities, it's not one city, it's two cities. So the city of London was burnt, razed to the ground, and people put in street plans, and one of the street plans was the Tree of Life from the Kabbalah. You know, it would have fitted really nicely, but the king, well, one of the problems was that all the land was owned privately, and to initiate a new design like that means he has to buy up private land, and the king had no money. The government had no money, the king had no money, so that was scrapped. But the Royal Society was also looking to see if they could find a universal language that everybody in the universe could share. This happened in the 50s with Esperanto. So there were two candidates. One was Hebrew and the other was Chinese. I don't know why Chinese would be, an international, universal language, but that's what they thought. And people were looking for that. So now if you go into the lodge, if you know what you're looking for, you will see the Tree of Life on the floor of the lodge. And they incorporated, I believe they incorporated it purposefully, trying to amalgamate the idea of, Christianity and Judaism and alchemy and all these ideas they're trying to get into our little lodge.
Thank
But
you.
the
Let's
Tree of
move on
Life-
with the.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize. Yes, go on.
Yeah, you want to follow up?
If I could just butt in, the talk on Sunday, the 20th December, will be about alchemy
Yeah.
and spiritual alchemy. Yes.
Okay, we have a question from Lin Chou. There are quite a few physical parallels. Can you speak to any parallels in principles and beliefs?
So, well, I think Taoism is a way of life. I don't think it's a religion. I know it's not a religion, it's a philosophy, a way of life, and so is Freemasonry. It's exactly the parallel. I mean, it's then let's see, you want some examples. It's 10:30 at night. My brain is kind of not working too well. Let's have a look, see if I can get it from my own book. Jesuits of First Nobility, Perfect Ashlar. Okay, here we are. Tenets of the Cardinal 249. So, yes, okay. So in Freemasonry, the 4 cardinal virtues are actually originally Roman. They were taken from Cicero. If you go to Cicero's writings, you'll see he has the same cardinal virtues. So instead of using the Chinese, I feel that some elements of the Tao ceremony are missing from Freemasonry, because I think they felt it was just a bit too foreign for English people. And one of them is kowtow, hitting your head on kowtow, hit your head on the floor. It's what it literally means. English people wouldn't do that. They've got pride. They wouldn't do it. The other thing they don't have is incense. We have no incense. Incense was a sticky subject in England, because incense was used by the Catholic Church, and the Anglican Church had been trying to get rid of Catholicism out of the country for over 100 years. So incense would be associated with Catholicism, and for that reason is not in the ritual. Brotherly love and truth, they align with, yes, okay. So Confucius has what he calls 3 tenets, and it's of propriety, benevolence, and righteousness. He says these are the 3 tenets you need to follow if you want to be a virtuous man. So I believe that propriety is the way we treat each other, which associates with brotherly love. Benevolence associates with our tenet of belief, and righteousness, well, it's very close to truth. And then you have the four cardinal virtues. They align with Mencius's teachings.
Sorry, brother Chris, I accidentally muted you.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah, you're
You
back.
get the bit about Confucius. 3 tenets.
Yes, the only last part, maybe
Okay,
one or two sentences missing.
Okay, so Confucius taught that there are 3 tenets. His philosophy could be boiled down to 3 things. He has a book called the Analects. I have a copy there, and it boils down to 3 things. One is proprietary, how to treat each other with respect, benevolence, and righteousness. And these align very closely with brotherly love, relief, and truth. And then our 4 cardinal virtues are very similar to Mencius, who I mentioned earlier. He's the second sage, the second philosopher in China. So we have temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice. And Mencius was teaching propriety, benevolence, wisdom, and righteousness. Righteousness is justice. It's just so close, And so,
okay, there
even
are,
like wearing white gloves in the lodge, why do we wear white gloves in a lodge? Yes, in fact, many lodges don't do it, but in English lodges you have to wear white gloves. The reason is because you are entering a spiritual place. It's rather like a church, and you shouldn't bring your dirty hands. You might have touched something negative into the lodge. The Chinese Taoists are the same. When you enter the temple, they don't give you gloves. They give you a wet towel to wash your hands, so you can leave the mundane world behind when you enter a sacred place. I imagine that, the first 3 Grand Masters were thinking, well, should we have a basin to wash the hands or something? They thought, oh, let's wear gloves. It's the same principle, exactly the same principle. I mean, I just seen so many connections between Chinese Taoism and Freemasonry. To me, it's.
Thank you. There is a question from YouTube. Brother Carlos Valenti from Argentina is asking, in Freemasonry, we have the earliest ritual documented back in 1696, the Edinburgh manuscript.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence that these Chinese rituals have antiquity? Is in that case, which is the oldest?
Okay, very good. So the Edinburgh ritual, first of all, I believe it's actually an expose. If you read to the end of it, it's just, first of all, it's a single degree, and it's a catechism. So it's a question and answer. There's no conferring or obligations or anything like that, but they do have a Bible in the ritual. If you get to the end of it, it starts to become very strange. It starts saying, like, they making strange faces at each other, and they trying to tease the person, and it's also talking in the 3rd person. It's written in the 3rd person as somebody explaining, not as being somebody as a participant, but somebody like a expose, which I believe it is. That is an operative Mason's ritual. So at that time, they only had 2 degrees. They didn't have a master. The master was master of the lodge, but there wasn't a master Mason. So this is sort of ritual that was being used all the way till 1750. And the Royal Arch was added in to give a 4th degree. And so this is to support the Irish and the Scottish, I believe, because it's much more of the Royal Arch is much more like a theatrical performance based on the Bible, whereas Blue Lodge Masonry is much more philosophical, we don't actually play out roles as King Solomon or King, Hiram of Tyre. It's much more subtle, I think, than the York Rite. That's why I don't see any connection between York Rite and these 3 degrees.
What about Chinese rituals?
And Chinese rituals.
What about their
back,
antiquity
so,
and
yes,
which one can
right.
be named if there is
Yes.
one?
So Taoism is based on the I Ching, and the I Ching is the earliest example of the I Ching is about 500 BC, but we actually believe it goes later to about 800 BC. And so the Taoism has existed since about at least 200 BC. So the initiation that I received, and I checked with the Chinese authorities, they say it hasn't changed in 4,000 years. It's been the same ritual non-stop, same 3 masters, the same light transmitting master. So Freemasonry that we know now, speculative Freemasonry, started in 1717. 3rd degree started in 1725. It's very immature compared to the Chinese. So that's why I feel it's, we.
Yeah. Which document, is there any document manuscript in Chinese which you could name? And from I Ching.
I Ching. I Ching, or the second one is the Tao Te Ching. I've got a copy here.
Okay. So these 2 documents we can say are D and Tao Te Ching.
But nowadays it's written with a D, not a T. The Chinese phonetic has changed.
D to T.
Tao Te Ching. So this is the Bible. Yeah.
Okay. Answers taken. Thank you. And there is another question from brother, I don't know, Jonathan Bright. Can I ask Christopher if he believes there is any connection between his ideas of Freemasonry and the Hung Society?
The Hung Society, H-U-N-G.
H-U-N-G, yes, if there is any connection between these 2.
Yeah, so it's exactly the same. So the Hung and the Hong and a lot of other ones. Hong means the Red Society. The Hung, I forget what that means. So there were around 1630, 1640 until about 1700, there were dozens of these little organizations, all having a similar system to Freemasonry. They had 3 brothers, they had initiations, they had obligation. I just read out 2 of the obligations. And sacred, they had to make promises. The difference is, so Freemasonry took the philosophy from China, from Lao Tzu and Confucius, and not just the lodge, the design in the lodge and other things, but also the ritual, the 1st degree and the 3rd degree are very Chinese. It sounds very strange to say they're very Chinese, but to me, it's surprising. Yes, and so they took these ideas and they added some things that the triads, the Hong and the Hung and the three dot society, and I forget. They had similar rituals, but the difference was there was a penalty. Now the Taoists don't have penalties. There's obligations and things, but there's no penalty. We have penalties, and I think the English also from this Mandarin told, because he would know what's going on. It was exact the time he left China when the fighting was going on with all these secret societies. So he would have known about the societies and their penalties.
Okay, thank you. We have Brother Christian from Chile. Floor is yours, brother.
Hello, do you listen to me?
Yes, yes, we hear you.
Okay. Thanks, David. Nice to see you. First of all, my congratulations to Brother Christopher for his very deep information. I enter later, but I don't know if someone else or if you have explained something about the relationships between the two Chinas, because if you say that Taoism and Masonry have similar principles, why the popular Chinese government doesn't allow to exist the Masonry as in Taipei?
Oh, it does exist in Taipei. It doesn't exist in mainland China.
Mainland.
So the Grand
Yes.
Lodge of China is in Taipei.
Yes, I know.
Yes, but in mainland China, they believe all foreign organizations are subversive to the government. So they won't let any organization, let alone Freemasons, but like Rotary and many of these other organizations, they won't allow them in China.
Even
The government is
e-
even
even we are
Christianity.
even we are similar to Taoism. And it's
Yes.
a philosophy, not a
Yes.
political party or religion.
Well, if they read my book, they may understand and change their mind. But at the present time, they don't know about the connection between Freemasonry and Chinese philosophy.
Yes, yes.
You know, this is. I think I'm the only person who've written about this. You know, and it actually makes it really difficult. If you're the second or third person, it's easy. The first person is a little bit of a challenge to tell people. By the way, Freemasonry is based on Chinese philosophy.
Okay, Brother Christian, any
Well,
follow-up?
Thanks.
You're fine. Okay,
No,
so
thanks.
you're welcome. You're welcome. Here is my question, Christopher.
Sure.
We've been discussing Freemasonry's phenomena, its elements, its different kind of setup of the lodge, symbolics, and the components in there. You explained from your personal experience and the books you read, the Taoism and a lot of coincidences at least, and then you kind of looked at it from Chinese perspective at Freemasonry and saw huge influence, or at least kind of connections, and you even found the person who could have been a kind of a bridge between these two phenomena, cultures, or organizations. My question is, don't you think that it is not Chinese, it is not English, it is not Scottish, it is not Roman, it is not Egyptian, but it is like this primordial, pre-diluvian kind of original setup or philosophy or whatever system of beliefs that existed out there, and that's why it has so many similarities, because we had talk here with Muslims, with Sufism, with the Jewish Kabbalah, with English, of course, Scottish, so many different cultures. We here in Sapereal that we discussed so many different. Now this is the first time we looked at it from the Chinese eyes. But so my question is, don't you think it is something very common the humankind was kind of sharing back then, which now is represented by kind of different pieces, but in essence it has so many same things, and now we see. And it depends, as you said, if you know what you look for, you will find it. If you were looking for something Chinese, then you will find Chinese. But if a Jewish person looks at letters or whatever, he finds all the Jewish things there. So what's your, is there
Right.
any,
So
could
yes.
this
So I
explain
looked at that, and one of the things that kind of, you know, I found about nearly 30 correspondence between Chinese philosophy and Freemasonry. 30, it's not a coincidence when you get 30. It's like, you know, there has to be a pattern there. What I didn't talk about was the ritual of the third degree. This is, so Freemasonry is basically about a quest for immortality, I believe. In the third degree, there are all these references to immortality. your soul never dies, this sort of thing. Yes. There's probably 12 references to immortality, or like living forever or never dying, this sort of thing, in the third degree. That's why the third degree is, I call it the quest for immortality. At the time the Freemasonry was being rewritten by these three Grand Masters, taking the operative ideas but completely changing them. If you look at the operative ritual, like a brother just mentioned, the Edinburgh Registry, but there are much better ones like Masonry Dissected, or Three Distinct Knocks, and these rituals that existed, and there are about 20 of them. You can see that some ideas have been picked from that to build the Premier Grand Lodge's ritual, and it was rewritten. And one of the things that was uppermost in people's minds at the time was the subject of immortality. People had written books and become very popular, writing. That's what I say. He meant Freemasonry is banned in mainland China. Yes, it is. Freemasonry is banned in mainland China, like many foreign ideas. Sorry. Yes. So immortality was a subject of discussion in England at the time. Even in Parliament, the Parliament discussed. One person, Charles Layton, wrote a book saying that the soul does not exist. And he was taken before court in the Parliament, and they discussed it, and they said his book was blasphemous, and his books were burnt and destroyed, and he was punished. So this idea of immortality was like sacrosanct. And so the Freemasons at the time found this document by this Chinese Mandarin called Sheng, and it has a ritual for proving immortality. I didn't talk about that, but that's the third degree. And he has a ritual. It's exactly the same as our third degree ritual with Hiram. But if you understand, it is quite complicated, but it's an internal spirituality for the body to have an out-of-body experience. This is what the Chinese were showing you. And this is what the third degree is about. Hiram trying to get out of King Solomon's temple and breaking through the North Gate. There are a lot of strange things about that story.
And that is discussed in
I
your
can tell
book.
you one strange thing now. But this is the talk on, what day is this? 5 inconsistencies.
Yes,
it's
yes,
a
we'll
talk
have that one.
for Master Masons. Yes, that's on November 29th. But one of the strange things that gets me, Hiram, first of all, escapes through the South Gate, yes? Yeah. And he's attacked. Then he goes to the next gate round. If you go around from the south, is the west. He's attacked again. And the deacon says, okay, let's escape by the east gate. Why the hell would you go all the way around the temple when you're being chased by somebody? Why not go out the north gate? It's closer. Well, there's a reason for that, yes? He can't go out the north gate. In Chinese philosophical terms, he cannot use the north gate. So, it's that kind of thing. It kind of answers the puzzle. Why didn't he escape out of the north gate? It's just there, No, you got to go around the temple to the other side, from the west to the east. That's crazy. But if you think in Chinese philosophical terms, and it's named after a book called the Golden Flower, The Secret of the Golden Flower, translated by a German scholar, Wilhelm something. You can see how it fitted, and it's just all fits into that story of immortality. It just fits very well. So that's why I don't think it's one of these primordial, everybody, all tribes around the world were thinking the same thing. It's just too many coincidences for it to be, chance, and particularly the third degree.
Okay, we'll have opportunity to go into deeper discussion with that inconsistencies and consistencies as well. So let me give the floor to Brother Ines now.
Hi, thanks, David. Brother Christopher, just a quick question. When you said that there are almost around 30 possible philosophies, or rather 30 philosophies in Chinese culture, which you have found, which is which is parallel to what we have found in Freemasonry. Can we get to know how old are these? Like, was it in the 1500s or the 1600s, or is it older than that?
The Chinese philosophy?
Yes, the ones which are showing parallels to what you have found out in
Yes.
Freemasonry.
Yes, so they date from about 500 BC, and the newest one is 200 BC.
Oh, okay. So it's almost, wow, that's good.
4,000 years, yes.
Yes.
And this one's the new one, and this one is about yes, probably 1,000 BC.
Right. Now, because based on what David was actually asking you prior to me asking the question, right? Like, there was obviously some older ancient mysteries, or rather ancient regions which actually had something very similar when it comes to Freemasonry. We have seen that in some of the earlier lectures we have heard about, as he was mentioning about Sufism, or maybe it's in the Middle East. But we have also seen some of these which are I can't just say parallel, but it is literally like a copy and paste from the ancient Indian philosophies which were actually going on. And by the way we have understood, and with our limited understanding of those concepts, they are almost 4,000 to 6,000 years old, because they were during the Indus Valley civilization. So
you mean the Vedas?
Yes.
Yes.
There are so many of those points which were there. So is it possible that this region, which I would say the east of the world, right? Like, let's say from the Indus Valley all the way, you can say up to China's extreme. These are the people who actually had that kind of a knowledge. Why? Because obviously they were thinking about all these points, and they were able to comprehend them, maybe able to write it down, or maybe was able to talk about it. So that is why those philosophies kind of match in this region, rather than it being matched with any other places. It only started moving from our area, rather the east of Asia, to the western part of Asia, as well as the European, was due to the trade routes. That's when obviously the Egyptians also had something very similar to it. And obviously from there, the Greeks, and then finally the Promised Land and everything.
Yes. Yeah, it's quite possible. It's just I connected it with the Chinese because I went through a ritual in a Chinese Taoist temple, and I recognized the similarities. But in China at the time, there were two competing systems of philosophy. One was Taoism, the other is Confucianism. And in the lodge, we can see both of them in the lodge. So, yeah, it's I'm not sure.
Thanks for that, at least.
No,
that definitely makes us need to read the book, so that we can clear more of our doubts, and we can then ask you more questions about it.
Understood. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
I already shared the link. It's quite easy to find. On Amazon, you can find all 4 books.
Yes.
Also, in the invitation letter and in the public chat here, I shared Brother Chris's personal website, so you can find not only books but interesting POs and other details of his life journey, I would say. And you mentioned the book. I just tried to find out The Secret of the Golden Flower, right? That's the book that you referred by Richard Wilhelm. And actually there is one on archive.org.
Yes, there is. Yes.
With European commentary by Carl Jung as well. So if anyone wants to get one, seems interesting.
Actually, I used a modern translation done in Singapore, I think it was, by what's his name? Charles Yuk. He calls his book Taoist Yoga. It's easier to the Golden Flower is written as a poem, and then not Jung, but Wilhelm. What was his name? Wilhelm.
Richard Wilhelm.
Richard Wilhelm. Yes, thank you. Richard Wilhelm. He explains what the poems mean, and it's a little bit difficult to understand. The Taoist Yoga book is written as a conversation between the master and the student, and it's lots of questions and why is this like this and why do you do this, and so it's a little bit easier to understand, I think.
There is one book, Taoist Yoga, Alchemy and Immortality. Is that it?
Yes.
By
Yes.
Pi Chen Chao?
That's the original. Vincent Chow. I think his name's Look, isn't it? Charles Look. I can't see. I think my copy's over there. I can't get there.
Oh yes, I guess he used both. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay, Brother Richard has question, and Brother Sri. Just to remind everyone that we've been around for 2 hours exactly. Christopher, are you okay with time? Can we have
It's 11. Yeah.
5-10 more minutes?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, so let's keep that in mind, and let's ask quick questions for quick answers. Brother Richard, let's start with you.
Brother, you're talking about the I Ching. I Ching has those lines, and it's basically depicted with that sort of short line, long line pattern in a circular form, and also has an association to the yin and yang. So the yin and yang can also be interpreted as a tree of life. Could you bring some highlight that in some way from your perspective?
Yes, I talk about yin and yang and also the I Ching in my book. I'm not so familiar with the tree of life. I know I believe it was used as a pattern in the lodge, because the officers are all sitting on the different triangles in the tree of life. About the philosophy of the tree of life, I'm not that familiar. Yin and yang are reflected on the floor by the black and white checkered squares. So in a Taoist temple, everybody wears black and white. And normally they wear, I think you put a picture of me somewhere, but with a white shirt and black trousers. The idea is that it's black and white stand, the checkered floor. We say it's for good and evil. I think that was a mistake by the Grand Masters. It isn't good and evil, it's positive and negative experiences, not necessarily good and evil. And so in Taoism, that's what yin yang stands for.
Sort of equilibrium and balance. Okay, thank you so much.
So it's Taoism, the I Ching is balance between black and white, but it's also growth and decay and growth and just going around in a circle, yes. And it's yin yang's a very interesting philosophy, but it's a dualist philosophy. And if you see the cover of my book, let's see, you can't see it here, can you? Anyway, in England, in London, before St. Paul's Cathedral was built, we had Westminster Abbey, which was built in about 1000 AD, and it only has 2 towers. And to me, that represented dualism and the 2 degrees of Freemasonry. Then in 1690, and St. Paul's Cathedral was completed in 1714, it has 3 towers. It has a dome and 2 towers. So that goes from the dualism to the Trinity, and from 2 degree Freemasonry to 3 degree Masonry. That's how the symbolism I saw it.
That could mean that Buddhism, and I'm talking about 2nd century Buddhism, could have a huge connection to the roots of Freemasonry in some way.
Maybe. I have
Okay.
no idea.
Okay. Let's be quick,
to
Richard. Let's give the floor to Shri. Richard, sorry for that. So we can have everyone.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, please.
I know we're running short of time, and this is a much longer discussion than we have time for. So I perhaps would leave it more as a comment, but of course, it'd be great if others, including Brother Chris, would like to respond. And that is, I do believe that, especially when we adopt the esoteric school to analyze or to critically look at Freemasonry, I fully agree with brothers David and Rinesh in that we see what we want to see. Because at the end of the day, Masonry as we know it is really an amalgam of these ideas and thoughts which find reflection across various cultures and various philosophies and indeed various religions. And some of it may have to do with what David was saying in terms of it being rooted in a perhaps primordial morality of sorts, where different cultures independently have developed very similar mores and norms and value systems. And that can also be buttressed or supplemented by the fact that the connections in the ancient world were actually more than we realize at first glance. And as we make scientific developments in archaeology and historians come to the conclusion that these connections were much more than, for instance, just as one small example, there's a temple in not too far from where I live in the west of India called Ellora. It's a rock cut temple. It's one of the wonders of the world, honestly. It was built in the mid 700s, so 8th century. In amongst the carvings, there are carvings of Chinese dragons and African giraffes. Now, obviously, there was a lot of contact and trade between the ancient civilizations of the world, which would mean perhaps also that there was an exchange of thoughts quite naturally. And therefore, I do not think it's binary. I don't think we should, I'm not saying that's the case. I don't think any one of us should say that, Masonry has its roots in Judaism or in Hindu philosophy or in Taoism or Kabbalah. It's reflected in all of these, and all of those are reflected in Masonry. I think that's the way to look at it. I don't think that we can definitively say it's just one thing, but it's really interesting to see how many cultures reflect those same not just philosophies and belief systems, but sometimes even the rituals and the furniture in the lodge and the orientation is common to so many different belief systems.
Yeah, I understand that. I think that's one of the how the first three grandmasters did such a good work in not making it look like anything. It made it appeal to everybody by not being, it wasn't Christian, it wasn't this, it wasn't that. But at the time in 1724, Jonathan Swift published a letter in a book where he said that he thought Freemasonry had Chinese origins. And then in just after the second degree, the second royal noble Grand Master, who's the Duke of Wharton, so it would make him the fifth Grand Master, except George Payne served twice, so he's either the fifth or sixth. The Duke of Wharton set up a rival organization called the Gormagons. The actual title, it is the Chinese Order of the Gormagons. Why would he set up a Chinese Order of the Gormagons? And he copied the Freemasons. He had all the same things, except the main officers all dressed up as Chinese. They had clothes. You can see a picture of it in my book. I have a picture of it here. You may be able to see it. It's a very famous picture by Hogarth. Let's see, what page is it? Somewhere around here. Where are we? Here we are. Don't know if you can see that. Hold on. I got a detail. So this is Hogarth is making fun of the first three Grand Masters, de Sagoulier, George Payne, and on the left-hand side it has the Gormagons, and we have a detail of it at the beginning of the chapter. Here you can see that better. These are all Chinese people. These are the officers of Duke of Wharton's Chinese Order of the Gormagons. It's just so many things. Jonathan Swift, he believed it was. He wrote a letter saying he thought it was. I just see so many coincidences.
That picture looked like, to me, more the three wise men visiting within the Christ. I mean, that's more like Persian kind of Middle Eastern
Well,
clothes instead. I don't think
yeah, that's
Chinese.
because in those days they didn't really know what Chinese people wore, you know, the clothes. They didn't have many samples to go with. But
Okay.
the person who drew the picture, he put the names underneath the picture. He's got a list of who they are. And he says, it's the Emperor Qing. First Emperor of China is the first one. Confucius is the man on the left. Qing on the Volgi, and the Mandarin Hongqi. Put the names on them, so we know they're Chinese, you know. So and they're coming out of this is a Masonic lodge. You can see the rummer. The sign here is for the Rummer and Grapes, which is one of the first lodges in Masonry. There's a man holding a sword at the door. There's another person holding a candle because it's dark inside there's a square and compass in the picture. You know, there's all these things in the picture. So there's just so many of these Chinese themes around that time. So it's just, you know, I don't think it's a chance. I think it's probability, not chance.
No, absolutely, Brother Chris. This is perhaps another example of the European fascination at the time with Eastern philosophies. I mean, it's actually quite understandable that somebody would come up with a quasi-Masonic order based around Chinese characters, much like the August Order of Light based on Indian or Hindu deities, which is, again, a British invention of the late 18th, early 19th century. Or is it, sorry, the late 19th, early 20th century? Maybe I'm getting my dates wrong. But yeah, I mean, I can understand that fascination for Orientalism, which is now not a term we use, it was reflected in all sorts of things, including chinoiserie and the architecture
and it all stopped in about 1880 with the Opium Wars with China, and China stopped exporting things to England. Then people in Europe started looking at something else, and what they turned their attention to was Egypt, and then Egypt became the big thing in Europe, and they were stealing these obelisks from Egypt and bringing them to Rome, Paris, and even London. And so these things go in phases, but the chinoiserie one was started in about 1680 and finished probably about I'm not quite sure when King George IV died, so about 1860, 70, with the Opium Wars. And then, you know, because they knew nothing about Egypt in those days because they hadn't found the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone wasn't found until 1890 or something. So without the Rosetta Stone, you can't translate the hieroglyphs on the walls. You don't understand anything about Egyptian history or their religion or anything. But when they found the Rosetta Stone, suddenly everybody wanted to know about Egypt. That's how things work out.
All right, I think we are.
What I would like to just quickly ask you, I think in the chat, there are lots of questions maybe in the chat that we might quickly want to.
I always read all the questions. There'll be just a few comments. Yeah, sure. And I read it because chat is not being recorded, and that's why I always try to go through them. I will just mention for recording purposes that you mentioned there is no Rotary is also prohibited on mainland China, and brothers found that,
I saw that.
Rotary is not exactly prohibited, but quite well represented in China. So just a correction of information for recording purposes. And
I saw that.
Yes. Sorry.
I think the Chinese are very suspicious. You know, like Christianity is held in basements in people's houses nowadays. They don't stamp it out completely because, you know, the Jesuits in the 1620s, they built hundreds of churches across China. So generations of Chinese have been brought up as Christians. So it's very difficult for the Chinese government to try and stamp it out, I think. So they just suppress it, you know. They don't allow them to open cathedrals, but, you know, they don't persecute Christians too much. I don't know.
Too much. Okay, there is another interesting comment from Brother Eitan from Israel, and he says that in the Hebrew ritual, Hiram starts at the south gate, then the north gate, then the east. So actually, northeast
So-
being used there.
So this is one of the things I raised in my book, because Freemasonry has spread across the world. The ritual's different in different countries, of course. And so in Massachusetts, which I'm a member of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, we use one of the oldest rituals, the Webb ritual. And it starts, he escapes in the south, goes to the west, is killed in the north, and then he is buried temporarily in the east. And then the body is brought down back to the west for a proper burial and the raising. And so
Okay, yeah.
that's how it works in the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. But, you know, different countries do it differently. So yes, I acknowledge it is different, yeah.
Okay. The question, Rinesh, you're asking which book is this? We discussed The Secret of the Golden
Yeah, so the
Flower.
Golden Flower is based on the last book that came out last week, Royal Arch.
Oh, okay. I haven't got the chance to go through that yet.
Yeah.
Okay, it's 1/3 about Royal Arch, but 2/3 about the third degree and this secret Chinese ritual that was popular in Taoism. And the first degree is about awakening the spirit, basically the transmission of light that wakes up the candidate's spirit. It's and this is all about the Taoist and
right.
how it
Brother
got
Christopher,
to England.
the last photo which you showed about those three men, right? They are from which of these books?
Oh, the initiation by light
By
shows
light.
the Gormagons. So the Gormagons, so Wharton, Duke of Wharton was the Grand Master. He would have known about the third degree that the three masters were writing in 1725, because he was Grand Master in 1723, I think. So if they were preparing a third degree, and we know by looking at the constitutions, there's a picture of the constitutions in the back, I think. Was it the other book? Hold on a second. When you got 4 books, it's easy to get confused. Yes. So here we are. This one. This is the front page of the 1723 Constitution. I think people have seen this before. Yes.
Yeah, Anderson Constitution.
This is the Duke of. On the left is the Duke of Wharton, and this is the Duke of Montague. Duke of Montague was a good guy for Freemasonry. This Duke of Wharton was a disaster. He was a drunk. He was a traitor to the country. He did everything wrong. Anyway, what's interesting about this is from 1723. At the bottom of the picture, it says Eureka, and it has the Pythagoras theorem. That comes in the third degree in 1725, 2 years later. Why is it here? Because in 1723, they were still planning it. And this is a kind of little code that they put in there. So in 1725, they wrote the third degree and completed the story. But 2 years earlier, they were still thinking about it. You can see. Yeah.
Okay, I think we could continue. I mean, there will be questions, but it's quite late for you, so we'll reserve your energy for the next lectures. We still have 3 of them. One of them, I'll remind, will be private one for MMs only. We have done this.
That's in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
That's the 29th of November.
Yeah.
And
that's
we can ask different questions, because I wrote them as each degree separately, but in the last book I join all the stories together as one kind of theory about Freemasonry. So each degree, though they look separate, but they all have a part to play.
True. And what I found out is that the first 3 books books of yours are also available in Kindle version, but the
Yes.
fourth one, the Royal Arch, is only printed one. So I
I'm
guess it's coming.
I'm working on the Kindle. It should be ready next week.
Okay, so it's coming.
Yes.
So it's
Yeah,
coming.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's coming.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
It
Thank
takes
you
time.
No, I understand. Just I was going through that. It's sometimes easier with this shipping to get Kindle, and
Sure.
you can carry it everywhere. That's also an advantage of having it electronic way. Okay, as we always say, maybe if you want any final remarks to leave as a record for the recording, any references, anything that you would recommend. Yeah, we are not the participants here, but the viewers on YouTube later on. You want any final remarks, or then I'll close the.
Well, I have a Facebook page called Spiritual Freemasonry, and these books are all part of a series that I call Spiritual Freemasonry. It's a bit difficult to see, but
Closer.
I call
Yeah,
it
now it's in.
Spiritual
Yeah.
Freemasonry. And so I have a Facebook, and you can leave me questions, and I'll answer your questions. You know, if you're driving home today and you thought I should ask that, you can just send me a question, and I'll get around to it.
Okay, thanks so much. So, the viewers on YouTube or later on, they can access Christopher's webpage. I will add this into comments or to the video as well, your webpage, so they can easily find it. And in the description, I will add it later on. So once again, I will remind everyone that today we had Saperiao the number 110. We discussed the topic Chinese in Freemasonry, and we had the pleasure and the honor to host Brother Right Worshipful Brother Dr. Christopher Earnshaw. And today is the 11th of November 2020, and this concludes the meeting. So, Nachwandis, that is goodbye in Georgian.
Nachwandis.
Nachwandis, yeah.
And
Nachwandis,
you.
until I see you next time, sort of.
Zaijian, same as Chinese, Zaijian, until I see you.
Yeah, Zaijian. Okay, there you
Thank
go.
you. Good night.
Yeah, everyone now can leave, and I can keep the room open until if anyone wants to continue discussion. I think that was very interesting part. I've never looked at why would have I, but still, it's an interesting kind of experience for me to look at the craft from a Chinese perspective. So it really was interesting. We still have 3 more lectures with Brother Chris, and we'll have plenty of opportunities to go into more details.
Yeah, David, Brother Christopher has lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and endless, boundless amounts of information. Definitely. So, I mean, it's going to be a good, and even if you go to his channel, you'll see his channel over there, I think it's Spiritual Freemasonry. I mean, so many amazing videos with such wonderful explanations. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I will just remind the members of the group of Saperiao de Plus that tomorrow at usual time, 16:00 GMT plus O, we'll have a very interesting discussion with Brother Pascal Grengoire, from Belgium regarding the living stones and an ordinary journey of a Freemason. So just check your emails or check the WhatsApp group for all the connecting details.
So, David, how does this work? If it's only meant for Master Masons, are
Yeah.
we then? So this is not going to be on the YouTube channel, is it?
No, it's not. It's not.
Oh, okay.
We actually recorded it. That's what we decided because the discussion is totally very interesting, and we just don't want to lose it in time. So, but it will be available only to the members of that group, and it will be individually sent as a link if anybody requests it. but not beyond the group. It won't be ever placed on YouTube or any public domain. Not that something very strange is being discussed. Just people are being more sincere, more into details than our own private experiences are being shared. So we just don't want it to. We just want to keep it private. That's a better way to put it.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, with your kind permission, I'll start closing the room. We still have plenty of things to do in Americas, I guess. We're still, or in Europe as well, still daylight there. And I will remind on Friday, we won't have anything on Sapere Aude. There are some activities planned here, and we'll meet on Sapere Aude on Sunday, and we will have Brother Walter Hunt. He's an historian from Massachusetts, so we will have a history of Grand Lodge of Massachusetts delivered by Brother Walter. So you're more than welcome. You will be receiving all the details, connecting details by Saturday, more or less. All right, if anyone wants to save the chat, there'll be some interesting comments that you want to keep on your computer. Otherwise, in a few seconds, I will finish the meeting with your permission.
Thank you, David. I'll take care. Take care, brethren. Good night. A lovely lecture, yeah, David, once more. I'm so happy, over the moon. Sorry, I took up some airtime over there. Extra airtime unnecessarily. I do apologize. Good night.
No, it's fine. That's fine. No problem. Just because of Chris time zone. Yeah,
overzealous feeling.
Let's ask others.
No, Christopher like is a mentor to me. The way I've studied his videos and his topics and his books, honestly, the data he's given me has been absolutely paramount in my project. As one of the only people to even think in that area. So he's definitely one of the most out-of-the-box thinkers out there, for sure, with regards to Freemasonry. So, wow. Thanks a lot for the experience of this, David. Thanks a lot. Won't be forgotten.
Excellent. So we're looking forward to your research on Wednesday, actually, next Wednesday.
Yes. I'm all ready. Absolutely.
We'll see all these conspiracy things going on.
No, I don't think it's conspiracy. It's very symbolic.
Is that all going to be revealed on Wednesday, is it? The conspiracy and the grand design of how Masons rule the world?
Yeah,
that's all going to be revealed on Wednesday.
Oh, wow.
Excellent.
So join us. It all starts in India. So join us on Wednesday.
Well, we're not that far. We went from China, now we have to go to India. No, so every country has to take their right to fame, and glory of it.
Brother Richard, is Red Hair Mehta your relative?
Who?
Red Hair.
Dave, Mehta is a very popular surname.
Oh, okay.
No, not my relative.
No, he's a brother. He joined recently Sapere Aude. So
actually, my surname is a bit obscure because my surname is Mehta, but Mehta is actually in reference probably Gujarati, but I'm not Gujarati. I'm Parsi. So the point is, we're from a Parsi Mehta family, so we're Parsi Mehta. So a bit like quite off the ball there.
Okay.
And then I'm Richard Mehta, so I've got that English first name and a second Parsi name. But actually, I'm Parsi essentially.
Okay, I understood that part. All right. Have a great evening, and yes, please.
I'm from America. We have all kinds of conspiracies. Don't worry.
Oh, I know them. We've watched these movies as well. So
forget about movies. Now that we are not being recorded, forget about movies, David. There are lots of conspiracies which are happening out there in real time.